Yo, this hot, this the spot, there it is, pod.com. We're interviewing the best comedians, so tune in quick and get your ears receiving them. We talking about life and life to stream right to you, from the microphone right to your home, dude. Side note, this might get embarrassing, but no, don't sweat, yo, cause there it is.
Welcome to the There It Is podcast, a comedy podcast to help you find your inspiration. I'm your host, Jason Farr. Let's do this. Thanks so much for being here. Thoroughly appreciate it. And we just have to take the time to appreciate this funky theme song. Music by previous guest Neil Brooks, who has a new song out called Hidden Shadows in the Midst, that you can check out on neilbrooks.bandcamp.com. That's I before E in that Neil. Fun episode in store for you today. We have a cartoonist, our first cartoonist. Her name is Emily Flake, and you've seen her work in The New Yorker and Mad Magazine, among other places. And we talk about how she got into cartooning and her process. Here's my chat with Emily Flake.
I grew up in Manchester, Connecticut, which is 2 towns east of Hartford, Connecticut. There is no reason anyone would have heard of it.
But you're in Brooklyn like me.
I am.
Now, not
too far from you, in fact.
Yeah, that's true. Now, we both made our move here through, I assume, for creative ventures. Is that what it was for you, at least?
Oh, absolutely. I was living in Chicago. I went to school in Baltimore, and then I was living in Chicago for a little over 4 years, and just kind of I just couldn't seem to really get any traction. And I realized, like, if I don't go to where things are happening, then nothing is going to happen for me. So this was in 2004, and I moved here in January 2004.
Wow. Well, you've done the stretch. I've only been here 3 years, So that's nothing compared to you.
I'm super old.
Well, I think we're around the same age, so. And I still just came here only 3 years ago. But
right.
So I've not had a cartoonist on the podcast before, so I'm super excited to talk to you about that. How did you find your way into that? Obviously, I mean, a lot of people, when they come on here, I might ask, how did you get into this? And they didn't get into it until after college. But I would imagine you being a cartoonist that you were drawing from very young.
Yeah, totally. I went to art school for illustration. And as far as cartooning goes, I sort of fell into it backwards, even though in retrospect, the path is clear, if that makes sense. When I was a kid, I wanted to write books and be a comedian, which is honestly something I had forgotten was my life goal until I was helping my parents clean out their basement. And I found this essay I had written when I was 9 saying exactly that was my intention as a grown-up, was to write some books and be a comedian, which I said was feminine for comedian. And so when I went to art school, my focus was illustration, but I found that, I got better reception if my stuff was funny. And so I kind of started leaning into that aspect of myself.
Oh, wow.
And here we are, basically.
What did you love growing up, comedy-wise?
So I loved one of the first. It's funny because the very first things I remember seeing and loving were Gay and Wilson and Edward Gorey. And my parents would leave National Lampoon lying around every once in a while, which I was way too young to read, but I did anyway. And I absolutely loved Sherry Flanagan, who I was not old enough to be reading. But I loved that growing up. And then, I remember when I was maybe 13 or 14, you remember the MTV half-hour comedy hour?
Yeah.
So I can't find this anywhere, but I swear to God it exists. There was a MTV half-hour comedy hour, live from Daytona Beach. And Janine Garofalo was on it. And she did some jokes about Gerardo, and the crowd just like turned on her, and she was basically just like, middle fingers up, guns blazing, like, you all can go to hell. And I was just watching this like riveted. I was like, this is everything I want in the world.
Yeah. Yeah, she was one of the 90s heroes in comedy, honestly.
Oh, for sure.
She really did go for it.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, like everybody else, like one of the very first things I remember loving was, the Steve Martin comedy, like, King Tut and the whole 9 yards.
Right.
I stole that record from my parents and tacked up the gatefold on my wall.
And obviously you grew up with a love for Mad Magazine. You had to have, being into the stuff
absolutely.
You're in. That's so it's really cool that you've contributed to Mad Magazine as a professional.
It is really cool. Yeah. No, it's fantastic. I am very, very thrilled that I got the chance to work with them, and it was one of the best professional experiences of my life. They the staff that was there when they were still in New York was like the nicest human beings you would ever want to meet. So yeah, I feel like I got really, really lucky in that sense.
Let's talk about how that ended up happening. So what is your journey into starting to get real gigs with cartooning and illustration?
So as far as illustration goes, I started. So when I was in school, I was in school in Baltimore, and I started coming up to New York whenever I could and showing my portfolio around. I would just I would go to newsstands and I would write down all the masthead information I could find, who's the art director, who's the creative director, their addresses and everything. And at that time, magazines still had portfolio review days. So you could go in and show your stuff. And so I would just call and be like, hey, do you have a portfolio review day? And if they did, I would come up and try to show my work. And then when I moved to Chicago, I would come out here, whenever I could, to do exactly that. And I got my first illustration assignment, right when I was graduating school, from a magazine called Juxtapose. Wait, was it Juxtapose? Never mind. It doesn't matter. But, so I was getting assignments here and there. I was an intern at the Baltimore City paper, which was the alt weekly in Baltimore at the time. And, I was getting work, but it certainly wasn't enough to live on. When I was in Chicago, I had a series of extremely boring day jobs. And then I waitressed for a while. And then I worked at a record distributor, which ended up being part of what sort of slingshot me into New York. Is that, I worked for this record distributor, but then when I moved to New York, I worked as an ad sales rep, which I was super bad at. But then a label distributor called Caroline called me and asked if I would like to come in for an interview, and I got that job. And that was my last day job. I worked there for, I think, about a year and a half. And then when I was working there, because I had moved to New York and I was really able to kind of, insert myself more into what was, the scene in terms of cartooning and illustration, I started making more money off freelancing. And for about 6 months, I was like, okay, I'm only going to live off my freelance income, and I'm going to put away all the money I'm making from my day job. So I did that. And then, so when I quit, I had sort of proven to myself that I could, I could make a living off of what I was doing. And I had a little bit of money in the, so that is good. I also blew through that almost immediately, but this is a very long answer.
No, this is a great answer. I mean, there's a lot of hustling in there and a lot of also just forethought and intelligence, just I'm going to put this money aside and work off, live off of this other money here. And real smart way to do
that's
that.
Dude, that's the only time I have been fiscally responsible in my life. I am not good with money, I have never had enough of a cushion to be as shitty with money as I am. It's just a mental disability.
Well,
really
everyone
bad.
has that, I feel like.
Yeah, well, especially if you freelance, because there's only so much planning you can do. You never know what your income is going to be,
Right.
in any given quarter. So, that's what I tell myself anyway. It is not my fault.
Well, during that time, that would have, I guess, was that early 2000s or mid 2000s when you were hustling and finding, looking at the mastheads and finding who the artistic directors were?
Exactly. Yeah. I graduated school in 99. So, from then to I quit my day job in 2006.
So what's the difference now with trying to hustle in that way? Like if there's someone who wants to the kind of work that you're doing, wants to be an illustrator or cartoonist, is it easier or harder to make that kind of hustle work?
Man, it's such a completely different landscape.
Yeah.
I mean, the things that are available now in terms of platforms and in terms of exposure are so completely different, that I have more to learn from somebody who's in their early 20s right now than they do from me.
And just because of how people get through, get work now? In what terms do you say that?
I mean, I think in terms of print media, I would imagine that, the process is still fairly the same. It's you try to get in touch with an art director, you email them, you send postcards, et cetera, et cetera. But in terms of curating an Instagram feed or finding other venues, et cetera, the kids who were born to this, I think, understand how to use the internet much better than I do.
I see.
I think there's a lot more opportunity in terms of, there are more forms of outlets, but there's a lot less opportunity in terms of print, obviously, and there is a lot less there's a lot less expectation of getting paid, which sucks. So, yeah, it's I don't know, it's a very different thing now. And like I said, I feel like the kids understand it better than I do.
I can see that with the social media stuff, particularly. For sure. It seems like there's a new one that's getting hip every week or something. That's obviously not true, but it changes so drastically.
I was going to say too that they also sort of understand different methods of hustling. That when the kids who figure out a way to translate a big Instagram following into Patreon or something like that, that's that is it's I don't think it is replacing the industry that was, but it at least allows one to carve out a little bit more of a handhold in this giant fucking cliff face that we're all clinging to.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's definitely it's a almost scary landscape because it is harder to find ways to make money now because there's so much out there and certain things just don't pay at all, or some of the things that do pay very little. At least that's how it is for actors and comedians, it seems.
For sure.
Yeah, it's no fun. It's no fun, and that's the thing. It's you have to find. You have to have the multiple streams of income game. You can't only look at the one thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I am not good enough at any one thing to only do one thing. So, I'm a cartoonist primarily, but, I also illustrate and I write. And, I was lucky enough to have a book come out last year, a few months ago. I teach, I do, I do a stand-up and also sort of a form of stand-up that involves cartoons. I do, anything and everything I can, honestly, just to keep, every possible stream, of income and also just artistic fulfillment open. So, but across the board, I think with everything, the idea of getting paid is more and more fraught, and I feel like there's if it's what you love to do, then the money shouldn't matter. I'm like, fuck You.
I mean, people who say that don't have kids to feed or something.
Right. Exactly. Or they have trust funds, or they have,
Right.
it's like, that is such unbelievably backwards thinking that,
Right.
you could do a whole episode just on that.
For sure. And, and I've heard people, and it makes sense, but I have heard, like Elizabeth Gilbert say that, we shouldn't put too much pressure on our art to be the thing that sustains us. But, if there are multiple things kind of in the same wheelhouse of, say, media or entertainment that you can do, then you still are kind of looking for your passion or your art to be the thing that sustains you. And, you have to do in order to do it at all, you have to do so much of it to sort of, keep your head above board with it, or to just like do the stuff you want to do, that to also have a day job in order to pay the bills while you do all of these other things is kind of unsustainable and unrealistic.
Yeah.
You have to do all the different things.
No, absolutely. And, obviously there's a danger in doing something just for the money. That's not
right.
That's not fulfilling. But,
right.
I think it's the lesser of two evils in terms of being expected to put your heart and soul into something that isn't going to keep your soul attached to your fucking body.
Right.
So,
Right. It's tough, and in certain, if you have a passion, you want to do that. You want to do it, and you want to focus on it in such a way that you continue to get better at it. I don't know how some people have some of the major crazy schedules that they maintain, like, some of these super famous people in business or in entertainment. They have like crazy schedules, and I have no idea how they sustain it.
Right.
I guess
they have help.
Right,
they have
exactly.
Massive amounts of help, like they don't do their own chores or pick up their own kid from school or cook their own, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like they outsource, I would imagine, like every aspect of their life that they can,
That's probably true. I mean, I don't know, like there was some time when like Mark Wahlberg's daily schedule came out, and it's like waking up at 4 a.m. and stuff like that. And it's like, what? Who has the energy?
Yeah. Yeah. Somebody whose job it is to have that energy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, and again, he has people doing his scheduling for him and doing all the other shit that like we all spend 80 hours a week on.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
But, nevertheless, we're still doing a bunch of things on our own, even if we don't have their schedule. And you're doing all these things that you mentioned, that you do these live shows. Let's talk about your performances for a bit. So when did live performing come into the fold for you?
So that happened actually like right before I moved to New York. John Hodgman emailed me, and he was doing a thing called Little Great Books at Galapagos in Brooklyn at the time. And it was basically like a variety show kind of thing. And he's like, do you want to do something for this? So I kind of came up with this, amusing cartoon slideshow lecture. And I did it, and I found it immensely fun. And then when I moved here, I started doing those, more often and really enjoying them. But at the time, mostly seeing them as like a way to get more illustration work. And it took me a really long time to realize, like, I just like doing them because I like doing them. Like, so over the past 2 years, I've been, tacking harder in that direction. And just kind of doing anything that will get me up on a stage, honestly, because and that's something that I could say that I do mainly to feed my soul in my artistic practice, because, there's not a whole lot of money in that.
Right.
But it is not just fun. It really motivates me in every other aspect of what I do. So, I do a bit of just like straight stand up with no pictures. And then I have a whole thing where I do sort of bits in between showing comics. I have a monthly interview show that I do called Nightmares, where I and my co-host talk to people about like their worst nightmares, and then I give them a picture I've drawn of their nightmare.
That's fun.
And yeah, so I hesitate to call myself a comedian because I have not paid those dues in that way. Like, but I like to get on stage and tell jokes.
Right. I understand. And did you mention John Hodgman?
Mm-hmm.
How do you know him? How did you meet him?
I don't know how, I think he might have seen, because I had a strip that ran in all weeklies for a decade plus called Lulu 8 Ball. And I think he might have seen either Lulu or some longer thing that I had done. But, he was running this lecture series, and this was like well before he was a famous person. So like, he would just have these awesome, like, nights of like, it was like a monthly thing with like writers and comedians and actors and anybody who just wanted to do something like fun on stage. And it was, I don't know, it was a lower stakes time.
But that's still cool.
And yeah, so that's how we met.
Oh, cool. You were saying you don't necessarily consider yourself a comedian because you haven't paid those dues, but you, with your comic strips, are writing jokes. Do you not consider that a form of, I would consider that enough of a form of presenting comedy that you could refer to yourself as a comedian.
Well, thank you. I'll take it. Yeah, I mean, no, I have been practicing joke craft in a very serious way, for 20 years. So, right. Yeah, I think that's a really good point.
Yeah. Let's talk about your joke writing and joke crafting. What have you learned about joke crafting, specifically in terms of cartooning and being a comic strip artist? Because it's very interesting, the process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's I feel like the process starts in the same way with just about anything, which is basically just thinking about the things that you think about regularly and trying to push the idea or aspects of the idea further and weirder, or marry it to something else, or just tweak it in such a way that it surprises and delights you. So whether or not that's something that you like a really thought out idea of like how you feel about politics or parenting or something like that, and finding an interesting angle on that. Or if it's, honestly, I have come up with gags by just sitting down and like writing down words and doing like brainstorm trees. So that's a total, like, just about the dumbest stuff. Like, I had one about horses that I ended up getting a gag out of. So yeah, I think the key of it is like, perspective and juxtaposition. I would say are two of the main, like, nubs of that craft as far as I'm concerned. And also according to many, many books I've read on the subject. Right.
And when it comes to writing a standard joke and stand-up, a set-up punchline sort of joke, there is that clear, like, here's the topic, here's the angle on that topic, and then expressing that in a clear way, and then you get to the punchline or joke, and you're setting up an anticipation from the audience. How does that translate when it's a cartoon? I mean, obviously some of the major part of that setup is what you draw. So that when you're taking that joke, and I assume the joke that you've written comes first, and then you draw something to match what you need it to match. Is that the process?
For me, yes. There are a lot of cartoonists who draw first and kind of use that as their entry point. I have always written first. And also, I think that a lot of my drawing is more like my people and the things that in my picture frame are kind of more like puppets and sets delivering my joke.
Right. Okay.
There are better artists who like are really able to that the humor is suffused in the entire picture, or like it's
Far
more
Side.
of a visual joke. Yeah,
Far
exactly.
Side's a good example.
And ideally the joke is if not purely visual, like inextricable from the visual. And I would say I hit that every once in a while, but for the most part, I'm kind of delivering one-liners. And I'm a much more economical writer in terms of like when I write for gag cartoons and when I write for stand-up or obviously like, essays or something like that. But I guess in one sense, you are setting up like, the premise and the world in the picture frame and then undercutting it with the caption. So, I guess you could argue that like that is also, even if it's just like a set and puppets, it's still important to having that joke land. I do find that the processes of writing for all of it really start in much the same way, though.
When you have a joke and you're saying, okay, I'm going to draw so I can have these things and puppets basically tell my joke, what sort of process do you have to go through to make sure that you get the right imagery for your joke?
I want it to read clearly. I want it to help deliver the joke as cleanly as possible. And, I want it to be a pleasing image. Like, I want the drawing to have sort of a harmony to it. And ideally not look too stiff or too awkward. I think there's obviously like a range of, if you just even take New Yorker cartoons, there's like a range of styles and technical ability. And some of my favorite ones are the ones where it's not like tightly or beautifully rendered like Liana Fink or Edward Steed or, James Thurber. But the things always, the imagery always reads and it's always like very immediate. And leaves you some room to kind of like, put your own feelings into it. I am not, there are some really beautiful, like very lyrical, draftsmen like, Liam Walsh or Will McPhail. And I think like they're such beautiful drawers. And they're one of the few that like, I feel like can get away with like a really beautifully rendered drawing. I don't love beautifully rendered drawing in terms of jokes. It's great in terms of like graphic narrative, but for jokes, it's not my thing.
I see. Who were some of your favorite comic strip creators in comic strips before you got into it?
Before I got into it, I was a huge Linda Berry fan, and I still am a huge Linda Berry fan. Ivan Brunetti, Chris Ware. I'm trying to think back of like before I was really doing this, and those were people that I remember having liked for like a very, very long time. And in terms of, everything has. That's another landscape that has changed like so much in the past 20, 25 years. Is that like cartooning has like blossomed and flourished in such a huge way. But I would say that like my biggest influences in terms of cartooning were definitely like Linda Berry, Sherry Flanagan, Gay Wilson, Edward Gorey, many others I am forgetting.
No, it was just interesting to hear. Like, sometimes it's just interesting to know who inspired someone. What about all of their work or just different things that you loved inspired you?
The style, the content. Linda Berry really spoke to me on a real heart-to-heart level. I was really drawn in by both her drawing and by just the world and characters and the feeling of being understood by it. Sherry Flanagan, I feel like laid an indelible sort of foundation of raunch in me that I am grateful for. Gay Wilson was just so delightfully weird. I feel like it worked me in the best way possible to have seen that when I was a kid, and Edward Gorey just being the spooky genius that he is. I think all of them really just sort of pulled me in and showed me a world that was possible and interesting, and something that I really wanted to explore and live in. That's
great. Did you ever get to meet any of them?
Oh yeah. I met Galen Wilson died recently, which is just very sad. But I met him when I first started going to the offices, and I told him, like, you're one of the reasons I became a cartoonist. And he looked at me, he goes, "I'm so sorry." But yeah, and from living in Chicago, I've met Chris Ware from time to time. He's an incredibly nice person. I met Linda Berry glancingly, but like I'm honestly scared I'll just like fangirl out all over her. And Sherry Flanagan wrote an introduction to one of my Lulu 8-Ball collections, and I just wrote an introduction for her book. So
that's wonderful.
So that makes me very happy.
Yeah.
Mimi Pond too. I loved Mimi Pond. She was like a real like trailblazer in terms of lady comics, and she is awesome.
Awesome. And you got to work at a bunch of different publications. I mean, if it has Time in the name, that you've done some stuff there, because it's New York Times and Time. Also Mad Magazine. Now, what was the work that you did in Mad Magazine? Was it your comic strip being presented in Mad Magazine, or was it kind of like, working on their stuff?
It was just gag cartoons. I sold them a couple gags.
Okay.
And yeah, so, like the front of the book used to be called the Fundolini pages. So it was like, gag cartoons and like one-off jokes. Okay. And so I did some work for them with that. And then I also drew a couple concepts that they had. Oh my God, like a greeting card, like a funny greeting cards thing, and some other ideas. And yeah, they were awesome. Just like the best, nicest human beings.
Oh, great. I mean, it's someone who grew up flipping through Mad Magazine. It's always good to hear that the people there were great. Now, you teach as well. That's actually how I found out about you, because you're teaching a class at the theater that I'm a part of, at the Magnet Theater. Have you taken classes there?
I haven't, but I have known about the Magnet since like its inception. And actually, like, I did a performance there that somebody from Mad Magazine was like in the audience and like came up to me afterwards, and he was like, "I'm going to send you like a contributor packet, and you should start submitting." Oh, wow. So yeah.
What was the show that you did?
It's a small world.
Yeah, it is.
It was actually like sort of like a book launch thing for my first Lulu 8-Ball collection. So I basically, Eugene Merman did some stand-up, and then I sort of like showed cartoons and did some bits. Although, as I recall, I was super drunk, so I would imagine it was not an awesome performance.
But it got you some gigs.
Hey, man. Sometimes a girl gets lucky.
Yep. Let's talk about your teaching, though. So when you teach, are you teaching joke writing, or are you teaching comic strip writing? What is it that you cover in the class?
I primarily teach gag cartooning. So I touch on drawing in terms of like how best to use your drawing to sell your joke. I don't teach like technique. There are way better teachers out there for that than me. But I teach like, idea generation and like, point of view building, and, ways to kind of get over like fear and blocks pretty much.
Okay. That's cool. People should take the class.
I hope so.
What are some of the things for people to overlook, like when they're trying to create a comic strip? What are some of the pitfalls that people run into?
I think it's really easy to get in your own head about the drawing. I would rather see an incorrect drawing done with like confidence and style than a tentatively but technically better rendered drawing. I also think that people are like, well, I can't draw, so I shouldn't try. When I hear people say I can't draw, what I think they're really saying is like, I'm not allowed to draw. Like it's something that they feel they haven't earned or don't have access to. And that's something that I would like to break down as much as possible. I mean, obviously not everybody is going to be like an incredible lyrical, drawer, but I think everybody can, if you can make letter forms, you can find a way to make forms that can help sell your joke.
Right.
That is what I believe.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. I mean, everyone can doodle a little bit.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't be above laughing at a comic strip that's just stick figures, honestly.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, Toothpaste for Dinner is basically like almost just stick figures. There's like a lot of like web comics out there that, and then sometimes like the simplicity of the drawing can even help sell the joke because it's so understated. I mean, again, as long as you make enough of a person for somebody to kind of like fit their imagination in there,
right.
I think you can make a successful gag cartoon.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, honestly, because, it is just sort of like placeholders so people see the thing.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have to be this like 3D rendered thing. Exactly.
And like when you really start to get into it, of course, there are like, ways that even within a less than lyrical drawing style, you can refine or make something work, et cetera. But, I just would hate for anybody to be like afraid of drawing. I mean, James Serber was like literally blind. So,
wow, I didn't know that.
Are some of my favorites. Yeah.
Wow. Well, then,
severely visually impaired.
Right.
At the very least.
Right. But that's inspirational.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, anyone can do this. Can do this work.
Right.
I mean, I don't mean it's that almost makes it sound like I'm disparaging it.
No,
anybody can do it.
Yeah. Any jackass.
Yeah, that's not what I mean. Well, we've reached the end here. It's time to create something together, and I think what has an idea that jumps out at me is maybe just breaking down joke creation.
Sure. I wish I had like a really like multi-step awesome thing to tell you. More or less what I do is I sit down and I just start like writing things down, and I start kind of branching off from that. Like, if I have horses, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I try to like branch off, like what do I know about horses? Like, what do they look like? What are they used for? Like, where does one usually find them?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what do I like about them? What do people dislike about them? Like, basically looking at it from every possible angle and then trying to branch off from that. Like, okay, if I know they have hooves, like, what can I change about their feet? Like, like, what if they are in sneakers? What if they're in high heels? Like, what if, et cetera, et cetera. Just trying to zero in on the aspects that I've listed and push and pull those aspects. Because I think basically anybody who writes jokes already leans towards like pushing away from like a normal or, straight point of view. So I think that's like a muscle that can be developed. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, just kind of breaking it down to like an intentional thing where you're like where you're just kind of like falling into a fact and experimenting with it and prodding at it is, I think, like the basis of how I start. And I mean, there are times when I will sit there and do that and like nothing comes and it sucks and I just sit there and I have nothing. But then I'll go away and like, I am not the first person to say this. I'll go do something stupid with my hands, like wash dishes, and then ideas will come,
Yeah, it's so
but if
weird.
I hadn't done that initial legwork, then, if I hadn't like prepared the runway, the joke never would have come into the airport.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think that's where people like, the blank page can scare people so much, but there's stuff up there. Just like let just anything come out. It doesn't have to be fully formed. I mean, that's the main thing is just thinking that, especially with joke writing, that it has to be fully formed immediately, but there is a process.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's sculpting in a way. And like, I think you could argue that, in some ways I almost feel like it's more joke finding than joke crafting. That like the jokes are out there. It's your job to find them and clear away all the dust and debris and like polish them so that they are, fit for presentation, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm interested in this brainstorming idea and how it can create a joke. So maybe we can kind of go through a process like that and just see what comes of it.
Sure. You want to pick a word?
Yeah. So how does that work? Does it start with a topic or just a simple word?
I often start with just a simple word. Ben Schwartz, not the actor, the cartoonist, and I used to send each other lists of words every week as like a sourdough starter for our weekly batch. And I mean, like literally just like one word list, like pigeons, feet, clown.
Okay. Well, how about rock?
Let's see, rock, like ROCK.
Yes.
Okay. So basically, you just like write down the word rock in the middle of a piece of paper. And I mean, like everybody has done like this brainstorming thing in elementary school, right? So rock. And let's see. So there's rock music. There's like igneous rock. How are rocks formed? Let's see. What are rocks used for? You can, branching off of that, I'm saying stoning people to death.
And then throwing a rock through a window.
Exactly.
So like vandalism.
Rock. Vandalism. Let's see. And I mean, so like I'm writing down Rock of Gibraltar just because my brain coughs it up, and whether that leads to anything, who knows?
Okay.
Gibraltar, the Rock.
The Rock came to my mind almost immediately, and I don't know if that's a good thing or not. No, I guess I saw him earlier on Instagram, so it's
I think his dad just died.
Yes, that's exactly what it was. That's sad news. That's why it came up.
That is sad news. Well, now this is ruined.
Let's see, rock.
I'm kidding.
I'm also thinking, living in a glass house, so don't throw stones, like that sort of thing.
Like, absolutely. Let's see, like precious rocks, like diamonds. Let's see. And, this is sort of like a thing where this is a very dopey joke, but, you could put together like the two meanings of it in terms of like you have the rock and you have like throwing rocks through a window, so if you threw the rock through somebody's window, they might be like super happy that you did that because he is very attractive. So, I mean, like, that's sort of the start of something, you know what I mean? Like, like taking those two, a fresh look at like those two things that don't belong together. And that's something too. I think it's like, one thing that I try to teach is like write a bunch of dumb jokes, like write the dumbest joke you possibly can. I'm part of a Facebook group called 100 Rejections, and like the goal is to have 100 rejections by the end of the year. And it's really like inspiring. Like, it's such a different thing to like, submit something like, and your goal is to get, obviously you really want it to be accepted, but like the idea of racking up rejections,
right?
Like,
you get so much stuff out there,
as possible.
Right. That's a really good idea, honestly, because I've heard that with people writing songs of just like get the idea out. Even if you can fix the lyric later if it's just a bad lyric, just like get it out. Like famously, Yesterday was Scrambled Eggs because it was just a placeholder for the melody. So just get the thing out, and even if it's bad, and let it be rejected. You can work on it later.
It might have been Hemingway who said this. I don't know, but it's like we write drunk, we edit hungover. Like just get it out there without like judgment or editing, and then go back in and look at it.
Right. Let's see. What else do we have for rock?
Or a woman with like the rock actually like sitting on her hand and showing it off to her friend. Like, it's the biggest rock you could find. It's just stupid stuff like that. But like,
And I could see
that's
the
where
image there, yeah. So is that some of it with cartooning, with making up a comic strip? You have the joke, and then you think, okay, maybe this one with someone throwing a rock through a glass house is harder for me to visualize, but I can visualize this woman with the rock on her hand, and her saying that line that you said, like that. Is that how you make a decision on the direction you're going to go?
Basically, the decision comes down to, like, did it at least make me give a little inward chuckle? If I'm going to, like, bother drawing it up and submitting it. But I mentioned before I started with horses a couple weeks ago, which like led me to rodeo and then rodeo clowns and then a joke which I just handed in, so I can't tell it to you, but because they haven't run it yet. But you just follow yourself down these little rabbit holes and just see if anything kind of makes you smile, really.
Right. Okay. And do you have times where you have a joke that's made you smile and laugh, but it just didn't seem like it could translate visually? Like if you've had a couple of jokes.
Really?
Okay. I wonder if that could happen with me. Like if there's a joke that I loved and it's like, I just don't know how to draw this.
I feel like for me the challenge might be more paring it down to fit into like a snappy caption, like you can't, you kind of want the caption to not be too wordy. And most of my captions is somebody delivering a line, and so I have plenty of cartoons where it's just like two people sitting at a table talking, but one of them says something that's, hopefully funny. So yeah, I don't know if I've necessarily, nothing springs to mind immediately that I've like thought of and been like, oh God, I just don't know how I would draw that.
Cool. Any final thoughts on using brainstorming to create a comic strip? Just
the idea that you just sit with it for a little bit longer than feels comfortably, than feels comfortable. Like you don't have to beat yourself to death with it, but like try not to leave the second you feel like there is nothing there. Like push it a little further and then either write down a different word or try something else, et cetera, et cetera. Like maybe put your phone across the room. This is something I really need to work on. I am way too glued to my phone.
As we all are.
But yeah, it's bad.
It's such a distract. No, there's plenty of studies that have pointed out having your phone, even if it's just face down and silent, next to you is a huge distraction and hurt the productivity of a group they were studying more than the people who put the phone in the other room. Yeah,
it's it's real. Yeah. Like, and even if it's just like 10, 15 minutes, just get it away from yourself and put your butt in the seat and do this thing, and it will get easier and it will get more rewarding.
Yeah. And sit with that idea longer is also very good advice, because it can be very easy once you've thought of the thing and you've put it together as best as you think you can, and it still doesn't seem quite right. It's very easy to just bail on it. So sit with it for a little bit longer than that.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, great advice. There it is. Thanks so much for being on the podcast, Emily.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
So awesome having Emily on. If you want to see her work and keep up with her, go to her website, emilyflake.com. She also has a book titled That Was Awkward, The Art and Etiquette of the Awkward Hug. And she has a podcast called Nightmares, which you can get on Apple, Google, Spotify, and more. Follow her on Twitter at Emily Flake and Instagram at eFlakeAgogo. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at There It Is Pod, and subscribe to our newsletter. It's like self-help for comedians. Links in bio. Oh, and that big announcement we have next week's episode. Y'all, next week's episode, we have improv legend Dave Pasquazi. Yep. Until next time, be good to each other.
The music for the theme song was created by Neil Brooks. The rap was written and performed by Nick Acevedo. The logo for There It Is was created by Jeff Prater. The There It Is podcast is produced by Jason Farr.